request that you raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
At first sight, the Mayoral Committee, their announcement made very favourable impact even to people who are not necessarily supporters of the new coalition that is running the city. They are much more representative than some of the other mayoral councils that have been announced by these new opposition councils that we see in some of our bigger cities. Also, many of the Mayoral Committee members are very highly educated with doctorates and so on in the fields for which they have been appointed for their portfolios. So I think from that point of view, a very favourable impression. The Mayor has made some very strong remarks during the appointment announcement, where he reminded some of these Mayoral Committee members of the responsibilities and that graft and superfluous expenditure will not be tolerated in their new portfolios, and that he expects support and advice from them, and certainly on paper they seem up to it.
From a political perspective, we're dealing here with a coalition city government, plus the delegate balance of a minority party who has to, in principle, every time decide whether or not they're going to support the new city government. What do you think about the mayor's semblance of his team from that perspective?
Well, I think it's been excellently done. There's two IFP members. Of course, we know the EFF decided to stay outside of government. I think it was a hugely strategic move on their part, for which one, from a political point of view, can only congratulate them. I don't think that it's necessarily a poor decision for the EFF or for the DA, who's the major coalition partner. I think there's many bigger parties in developed democracies around the world that could have learned from their example. Of course, the test is in the practice. So if the EFF is going to, without a significant reason, frustrate local government procedures, if that's going to become a pattern, then obviously it's going to be an issue. I don't think one could make an argument to say, on an objective basis, of course, that the Democratic Alliance or the IFP, some of the other coalition parties, are fundamentally anti-poor. But we do know that there is a big difference between some of the routes that these parties and the EFF prefer to get to some of the objectives that they share. It's also important to understand or to remember that many of the priorities of the EFF, such as land redistribution and so on, is not areas in terms of which local councils have huge remit over.
In terms of projects that's already in place, work that's already being done, say, for instance, Josie at Work and various other projects, where does this leave now the newly appointed Mayoral Committee and the new council? Well, can they just stop everything and start new projects? Must they continue?
Obviously, if there's projects that have contractual implications, those would have to be sorted out. But if it's merely at a policy level, the new city government's under no obligation to continue those policies where it's been originated by the city government. We have found, though, that the Democratic Alliance, in particular, have chosen to continue and perhaps improve the implementation from their point of view of certain programs, like the Expanded Public Works program, for instance, which is a national government program, but it's run through provinces and city councils as well. We do know that Mayor Mashaba has already indicated that he would like to pick it up, for instance, into smaller units. So that is an example where he's looking at making a significant reform to a key service that the City Council is making use of. They've also spoken about reviewing the skills of various appointees in the City Council. Certainly, there are political appointees that will be made in this period, heads of offices, executive support officers, and so on. Those are all people who has their employment contracts attached to the political principles which they serve. So that won't necessarily be part of a purge. It's just a case where the new guy gets to make bring somebody new in with him to support him.
So will we see a lot of changes, or will this come gradually when we look at the personnel and the staff in the municipal
Well, the
offices?
city council is a big ship to turn. It's numerous billions of rands that we're talking about here. So they might make changes to the budget allocations, but those will have to be made first before you can bring in new policies and programs and so on. Doesn't mean that the city government might not choose to rebrand some of these. You may recall that when the DA came in at the Western Cape, there was a rebranding in the province as well. So those kind of cosmetic changes may be made. But I think that there's a number of the existing programs, such as Josie at Work, which may certainly be kept in a small, a changed form of a limited proportion, but that it may still be advanced.
Do you think there will be enough constructive maturity amongst the councillors to actually take the city forward to the good of both the city and the residents?
Well, the ANC would have made the calculation that if too favourable a perception of the new coalition government develops amongst the populace, that come the next by-elections, they will be at a significant disadvantage. And we've seen how this has taken the DA from a minority party after the 26th local government election in Cape Town to being a majority party soon thereafter. So both, I think, the coalition partners as well as the ANC will be at pains to emphasize their contribution. Of course, one way in which former Mayor Parkstyle and leader of the opposition now is trying to do this is to point out some of the less politically correct aspects of some statements that Mayor Mashaba has made around some appointees to the city council. And one could only respect the fact that Parkstyle would have to fight his corner under those circumstances. But there's also a bit of substance to it. He plans a complaint to the Gender Commission. I think if he's confident enough to do that, then he must think that there's something to it.
And lastly, what would your advice be to the new mayor and his committee, his mayoral committee, taking the city forward?
The mayor has indicated that he plans to engage with business, with the private sector, which is very important. I think certainly there's a number of corners in the private sector which have felt that the previous city government was less than perfect when it came to that aspect. I think it's going to be very important for him to be seen to engage with communities and to take their concerns on and to be a mayor for all of Johannesburg.